Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Shortly before the beginning of the 2024 CDL season, where players can now officially sign contracts, a couple of rumours emerging as to where some key name free agents this offseason might potentially be ending up. Envoy not to Toronto after all is very possible. If it's his backup option to OpTic and FaZe, then might well be considering an offer. But if FaZe don't get potentially Scrappy or even Drazah, could they go for Sib? This seems like a realistic possibility with what JoeDeceives and Crowder have to say on the matter and his previous history with the organisation. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Let's dive straight into things. There was some just hilarious content going on last night here from Shotzzy. This guy guessing US states, like, just absolutely doesn't miss, to be honest. It's unbelievable what you see from this guy. But also wanted to mention this, right? So we know that on OpTic team, we saw yesterday that Hex was basically telling these guys, like, look, bit of online action here from OpTic again, as maybe Dallas Empire were considered a while ago back in the Modern Warfare days, but I don't really think that was necessarily so true. But whatever. OpTic were clearly this year better online than LAN. Maybe that's a bit of a consistent trend. And this, I thought, was quite the statement from Octane. Now, I think that he admitted that he probably exaggerated the number here somewhat, and it probably wasn't 44 maps straight, and maybe a bit of hyperbole, I think, you've got to forgive Octane for. But pretty much what he says is, since Ghosty joined OpTic, they played them online, and yes, it's LA to Texas, so OpTic you'd expect to be favoured on the servers and all this because LA teams generally have a hard time with it, and Thieves are usually better on LAN than online, and OpTic potentially the other way around. He reckons they were, quote, untouchable online. To think that they were that good for all that stretch of time, never, like, Thieves couldn't even win a map against them online, and yet a very different story when it comes to LAN, it's got to be said.
They beat us in 44 straight online maps. When they picked up Dan, the first time we played them, when they picked up Dan, we did not, from that scrim until scrims for champs, we did not beat them in a map. I don't know if the number was quite 44, but it was up there. It was up there. They were untouchable online. Literally untouchable.
I don't think OpTic will ever be super dominant. Ever. I don't even know how we were. Because the level of, like, I've said it a couple times, is the fan base on OpTic, like, the highs are highs and the lows are lows. But the problem is that when you're in between those, which is 90% of the time, when you're just good, you're not bad, you're not great, right? Problem is that when you're just good, they make all the fan support, which is immense, they make you feel like you're great. I mean, bro, you like Shotzzy, that one tournament, like the Dallas tournament, it would probably be insane, but I have no idea. I didn't really watch much. Was that his best tournament of the year? Because I gave him probably the simplest, stupid advice before they played that day. The only thing I said was, you can't kill people with movement. Shoot your gun. That's all I said. I said, shoot your gun, aim for 2 pieces. Don't go for the 3s. Let your teammates do it. Let them help you.
And I thought I'd throw in that clip as well there from Crimsix, because I think I mentioned it in yesterday's video, but I didn't share it. And I thought it was relevant to the discussion because Crim, like, look, this guy knows what he's talking about. He knows how to win. Speaking about OpTic in that way, I thought was really interesting how he said that he's surprised that they were as dominant as they were, and reckons that today, the reason why they can't dominate as they did before is because they get a little bit too confident because of the way the fan base works. And this is always something that I've thought, and it's like OpTic are always going to err on the side of being an overrated team, just because the fan base is the biggest. It's not that their team is inherently overrated or anything, but it's just like when you've got the most fans, it's the same in regular sports, the team is always going to be gassed a little bit more than maybe they should theoretically be. Same like FaZe last year in Vanguard. They were, you know, really good. I mean, they made all the second places, but they weren't gassed anywhere near as much as OpTic were for getting a couple of second places. Now, you could also argue and make a fair point that when OpTic fans saw Ghosty, a rookie amateur, join and Huke come into the team when they were trying to get pred, was there much expectation on that OpTic team? Probably not really. I think a lot of the OpTic fans were thinking, well, it's going to be a bit of a struggle from now to the end of the year, and then we'll see what we can build in the off-season. So to get, you know, the back-to-back second places, all the dominance online was actually very impressive relative to that. But just, you know, the LAN performances weren't there, and if you can't do much on LAN, especially at the end of the season, then were you really that good in the first place? But I also thought his perspective on Shotzzy was really interesting, right? That quote that he said about go for the 2 pieces but not the 3s. Like, that is a really, I mean, if you guys actually play COD regularly, it's probably one that you want to write down in your notebook, to be honest, because that's a good line for sure. And it feels to me that when you watch players like Hydra and Pred and even aBeZy, but certainly players like Simp in their prime and even Scump in his prime, like, that epitomizes the way they play the game. They'll get the 1, they'll go for the 2, and then they'll stop. It's like that controlled aggression. When you watch Hydra play, when you watch Pred play as well, especially in the early part of the year when he was dropping incredible numbers, that just sums up their playstyle. They'll go for the 2, and then they'll slow down. They'll, you know, they won't go for the 3rd. Whereas Shotzzy sometimes wants to go for the TikTok clip, right? And as Crimsix said, he was like, well, look, just shoot your gun, Shotzzy. Don't try and move at these guys. Just shoot your damn gun. The other reason, and I think it's certainly a valid one as to why OpTic are struggling to dominate as they did back in the Dynasty days, is that the competition nowadays is better than it was previously. And I think this has some truth to it. But I was just looking up and comparing here the events, well, the teams we had this year at the World Championship. This is the World Championship this year. The Subliners team, looking at the rosters here, right? Ultra, FaZe. There's some great teams here, no doubt. The FaZe team, the Thieves team, like, okay, Boston and Rokkr not so much, but outside of that, Seattle Surge had won an event last season. The Toronto team's obviously very good. Subliners, you know, great team as well. But I'm comparing these set of 8 teams to the top 8 teams at the 2017 World Championship that OpTic won, and, you know, won pretty convincingly in the end. There were also some great teams here, so I'm not necessarily sure I buy the idea that nowadays the competition is just so much higher. I think this year's competition in 2023 was definitely better. The teams were on average better than we had the previous season, but if you guys watched back in 2017, you'll look at this list and think, damn, there were some nice teams there. Like Envy, they were the 2016 World Champions. LG had won an event at Anaheim that year. Rise were always, you'd feel like you were going to beat them in a big match, but still, they were good. Then part of the legendary FaZe Jetpack team where they swapped around Gunless for Clayster. Clay then went to United. Like, you know, these were some very solid teams. And then you had Splice that had won an event that year, and even Ghost Gaming that were kind of like the underdogs, outsiders, as maybe Boston or Minnesota Rokkr were at the present day. So yeah, I think it's interesting that people will hear what Crimsix says and say, oh, well, it's probably just the fact that the competition's better. And I think there is some element of truth in that. But I'm not so convinced personally that that explains all of the disparity. But intrigued to your perspective in the comments below, because I think a really interesting discussion on that. Also, though, we've got to talk Rostermania, because it's coming to a conclusion, really, this whole free agency question mark period. Tonight, 11:59 Pacific time, basically, is when the season ends. And at that point onwards, maybe the players will be up late, signing contracts tonight to make sure things are absolutely set in stone, because I'm sure the teams have some contracts ready to go once they are enabled to do exactly that. So tonight, things are going to go down. There's no doubt about it. And I'm sure most of the teams have a very good idea, at least the top teams, what they're planning to do. But until pen is put to paper, you never really fully know what is going to be happening here. And there's been lots of debate as to what FaZe are going to do, but also where Envoy might go, because Envoy was considered by many to be one of the key free agents here. Potentially could upgrade any team. OpTic, I think, would certainly benefit from having him around. Even FaZe, you can very much argue they'll bring him into FaZe, do something with the roles and make it work. I think that's a good argument also. Then, though, we heard the rumours that he was looking at Ultra and that they were looking at sizing up an offer for him. Ben J. Nassim, though, says in the video here that I'll share for you guys, and also I'll share something from Crowder, but Ben says that, and actually very confidently he said this, that Envoy to Toronto is highly unlikely. And it almost sounds like in the way he said this, that he knows that Envoy's probably going to one of his preferred options.
Toronto, Scrappy, Insight, CleanX, and Envoy would be interesting, but I don't think Envoy's going to Toronto. OpTic, Dashy, Shotzzy, Pred, Drazah. Makes sense. Minnesota, bringing back GotterX, attach Fame and Real. I don't know if Minnesota is going to run back like a version of their team they had and a player they had 3 or 4 years ago. Like, I don't see it. Cellium, Simp, aBeZy, and Sib on Atlanta FaZe. Possible. Dante coming back. He was a sub at one point for Atlanta FaZe during Cold War. This would be an interesting team, and I can definitely see it happening. All right, we got my guy Sackman. Another Envoy take. The Envoy to Toronto thing is normal for top FAs. Fielding offers and leveraging them. I still think he goes to OpTic. He has a choice. I agree with Sackman here. I don't really see Envoy going to Toronto. I think it's more of a third kind of option for him. I think he's still sort of waiting on what OpTic and FaZe want to do, but I'm not surprised that he's taking the meeting. I just think, to Sack's point, I think he's using it as leverage to force the issue with OpTic and FaZe, who I think have a chance to sign him for sure.
Listen, we haven't talked about him a lot, but Sib is an incredible and very underrated option right now in the offseason as well.
100%.
Yeah, and we're not talking about him too, where it's like, yeah, Sib's not the sub that you're trying to build around like we talked about, but he is disgusting. Don't get it twisted. He is very, very good. And I will say one thing. I've talked to people around him about him, just his attitude, all that stuff too. And he's got he's been a very good teammate. He's, his head's on straight. Like he's been like trying to get better and better and stuff. Like he's also really good as well. So it's like Seattle can try and keep him potentially, and then like get people around him depending on that. But like I think they have a completely even chance of who's the better spot. It really just comes down to who wants to spend the more money right now.
So I think there is a very good chance indeed that what Envoy's done here, talking to Toronto, getting a little bit of leverage for the potential offers that he may or may not be getting in the coming hours here when they're allowed to actually give him offers from potentially FaZe, which would be very interesting if that was to be the case, but also from OpTic, which maybe makes the most sense. And at this point, I'm weighing up the possibility of like Envoy and Pred. Is that a realistic possibility? I think it could certainly work. But Ben did seem pretty damn confident that Envoy is not going to be going to Toronto, and it's just, he's just playing a little bit of a leverage game there, which does make sense from his point of view. He also mentioned FaZe Sib and the possibility of that, and he reckoned that it's not out of the realms of possibility. And also did, we saw from Crowder there, him giving a lot of gas to Sib. Now, would he say those things if they were getting Sib? I don't know necessarily. And Crowder, generally he doesn't criticize players too heavily. Like, he's not going to say the opposite of that about certain players. That's just the general personality he has, and it makes sense why he does so. But he gasses up certain players, Ghosty and certainly Sib in that example. And if they were going to sign Sib, would he say that? You'd think potentially not, just because, why would you gas up a player that heavily and make it very obvious that you're going to sign him type thing? But still, Ben did say that, well, there's a possibility there, potentially, that they look at getting Sib onto FaZe. And he was there before, back in the Modern Warfare days, when he was a substitute for the roster. Since then, it's been a bit of a different story for Sib. Obviously, he's been on Seattle, and there's questions as to how much he's moved in the right direction, because he was definitely a loose cannon, let's just say, back in the Modern Warfare days when he was on that FaZe substitute team as bench. They dropped him, actually, if you guys remember the drama about that they brought him back in a little while later. And then since then, I think he's been on the redemption path to some degree, and is seemingly a much better, teammate as well, that teams should be considering, and has been in the conversation for certain teams, I'm sure, but maybe not right at the top of them as you might expect. Is he the number one option for FaZe? I doubt it, but he certainly is an option were Drazah to go somewhere else, as we still don't know if that's possible. Now, I do also wonder what's going on with Scrappy. It seems like, on what we've seen over the last while, that probably they're going to keep this guy around. Seems like they want to build around Scrappy for the future, which makes sense. The monetary problems that they seem to be having may or may not have actually materialized, just because it seems like once the organization management actually made the decision on what they wanted to do, all of a sudden they had the money to potentially look at Envoy and potentially try and take their team even further in the right direction. But as OpTic seemingly said last night on stream that their team is almost ready to be announced, I doubt it's going to be Scrappy there, just because if that was the case, I would imagine it was going to take a little bit more time to get all of this confirmed. So I doubt we're going to see FaZe Scrap or OpTic Scrap. Would be a really interesting thing to happen, but hopefully if he is on Toronto, they can at least build a competitive team there, because I want to see this guy in more finals, because he's just way too entertaining. So very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts on all this in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.